Lady Whistledown here, and this is the tale of a duke who risked his title for a seamstress's hands. A humble seamstress was summoned to Morven Heights to stitch gowns, nothing more. But when she taught the duke's mute son, who was ignored, to speak with his hands, everything changed. The duke found himself drawn to her warmth, the boy finally found his voice, and the seamstress. She unknowingly stitched a scandal that would shake society itself. Love became the greatest threat to everything they held dear: his reputation, her safety, the boy's future. But how does a woman with nothing convince a duke to defy everything? And what power does a silent child hold that could change it all? Well, listener, it began with whispers in silk and silence. Beloved. Before scandal unfolds, do subscribe and whisper below. From what corner of the world do you listen to my secrets? I do so adore knowing my audience. Now then, shall we begin? I confess, when the whispers first reached my ears 3 days past, I dismissed them as the sort of drivel that circulates among bored parlour maids with too much time between the silver polishing. But then came the second report, and the third, and by the fourth, even I, yes I, Lady Whistledown, sceptic of all things saccharine, found myself intrigued. A seamstress arrived at Morven Heights on the 20th of April, a Thursday if memory serves, though the heart rarely concerns itself with calendars. Her name is Rosina, no surname of consequence, no lineage worth recording in Burke's peerage, no dowry save the calluses on her fingertips and a battered leather case containing needles, thread and patterns passed down from a mother she scarcely remembers. She came from the village below the estate, that cluster of thatched roofs and chimney smoke that the nobility glimpse only from carriage windows and promptly forget. The Duchess Dowager, Stephen's late mother, had commissioned her months before her own passing. A matter of spring gowns for the household, I am told, though one suspects the old woman knew precisely what mischief she was orchestrating. The Dowager always did possess a talent for benevolent scheming. Rosina arrived on foot, her skirts muddied from the climb, her dark hair escaping its pins in that charmingly dishevelled manner that makes certain men forget their station entirely. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, a woman whose loyalty to propriety rivals her loyalty to the Duke himself, nearly turned her away at the kitchen entrance. Seamstresses, she sniffed, are to send measurements and fabrics via courier, not present themselves like guests. But Rosina produced the Dowager's letter, written in that spidery hand we all came to recognise in her final months, and Mrs. Pemberton had no choice but to admit her. The Duke, for his part, did not acknowledge her arrival. Ah, Duke Stephen of Morven Heights. If ever a man were carved from winter itself, it is he. Widowed these 3 years past, he moves through his ancestral home like a ghost haunting his own life. The late Duchess, Elizabeth, though few dare speak her name in his presence, died bringing forth their second child, a daughter who survived mere hours. Since that blood-soaked night, Stephen has worn his grief like armour, cold and impenetrable. He is handsome still, I must report with journalistic accuracy, 38, tall, with that particular shade of dark hair that looks almost black in candlelight. His eyes are grey, the colour of steel or storm clouds, and they observe the world with the detached interest of a man who has already buried what he loved most. The tongue whispers that he has not smiled since Elizabeth's death, that he takes his meals alone, that he speaks to his son in monosyllables and his staff in commands, and his son. Oh, listeners, his son. Little Leo is 6 years old, small for his age, with his mother's auburn curls and his father's grey eyes. He has never spoken. Not a word. Not a sound, not even a cry according to the midwife who attended his difficult birth. The physicians were summoned, naturally, from London, from Edinburgh, even a specialist from Vienna who charged a fortune to pronounce the boy's tongue anatomically sound, but his voice perhaps locked by trauma of entrance into this world. The nobility, in their infinite compassion, have declared him cursed. I have seen how they look at him during gatherings, those sideways glances laden with pity or disgust, depending on the observer's capacity for cruelty. The mothers pull their daughters away as though silence might be contagious. The fathers discuss him in hushed tones over brandy, lamenting the Duke's misfortune in producing a defective heir. And Leo, poor child, has learned to make himself small, to hide in corners, to communicate through gestures that no one bothers to interpret. Until Rosina. On her second day at Morven Heights, while taking measurements in the morning room, she encountered the boy attempting to retrieve a dropped toy from beneath a settee. The other servants had walked past him twice, blind to his struggle, but Rosina, whether from kindness or simple observation, knelt beside him, retrieved the wooden horse, and placed it gently in his hands. What happened next, according to young Mary, the scullery maid who witnessed it through a crack in the door, was nothing short of miraculous. Leo looked up at this stranger with those solemn grey eyes, and Rosina, instead of speaking to him in the slow, loud manner people employ with those they deem deficient, simply smiled. Then she did something extraordinary. She raised her hands and moved them in deliberate patterns, fingers forming shapes, dancing through the air with purpose and grace. She was signing. Leo's eyes widened. His small hands, uncertain at first, began to mirror her movements. And then, oh listeners, steel yourself. He laughed. A soundless laugh, yes, his mouth open in delight, his shoulders shaking with pure, unbridled joy. The first expression of happiness the household had witnessed from him in months. Mary, overcome with the significance of the moment, dropped a tea tray. The crash brought Mrs. Pemberton running. By the time the housekeeper arrived, Rosina had resumed her measurements, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. But Leo remained nearby, watching her with an intensity that suggested he had finally, after 6 long years, found someone who could see him. The whispers began that very evening. By nightfall, every servant knew. By morning, the rumours had reached the village. By week's end, they shall undoubtedly reach London, carried on the wings of scandal and speculation that I myself am fanning with this very page. The Duke knows nothing yet. He keeps to his study, to his ledgers and correspondence, to the carefully constructed isolation he has built around his shattered heart. But walls, however thick, cannot keep out the truth forever. Something is stirring in the silent halls of Morven Heights. Something dangerous and tender and altogether forbidden. A seamstress with common blood and uncommon grace. A mute child desperate to be understood. And a duke who has forgotten what it means to feel anything at all. Tell me, would you risk reputation itself to hear a heart speak again? One does not become a seamstress to the nobility by accident. One becomes a seamstress because fate has stripped away every other option and left only needle and thread as defence against starvation. Rosina's story begins, as so many tragedies do, with loss. She was 12 when her parents perished in the fever that swept through the village. 12 when she became mother and father both to her younger sister Katerina, who was 8, and had been born without the gift of speech or hearing. The parish offered the workhouse. Rosina offered her hands instead. She learned her craft from old Mrs. Hadley, the village dressmaker whose fingers were gnarled with age, but whose stitches remained perfect. In exchange for lessons, Rosina swept floors, prepared meals, and brought increasingly elaborate excuses for why payment could wait another week. Mrs. Hadley, who had buried 3 children of her own, never pressed for the coin. Instead, she taught the girl everything, from simple hems to the complex embroidery that graces ball gowns. But it was Katerina who taught Rosina the language that would one day change everything. The child could not hear the world, could not call out when she was frightened or hurt or simply lonely. So the sisters invented their own communion. Gestures at first, crude and improvised. Then, when a travelling priest mentioned that schools on the continent taught formal signs to deaf pupils, Rosina begged him for instruction. He gave her a single pamphlet, written in French she could barely decipher, and from those smudged illustrations, the sisters built a vocabulary. For 6 years they spoke in hands and expressions. For 6 years Rosina's world was measured in the brightness of her sister's smile, in the quick movements of fingers forming words only they understood. Then came the winter Katerina turned 14. The fever returned, more vicious than before, and this time it took only the young. Katerina died on the 5th of January, her hand still trying to form the sign for sister, even as the light left her eyes. Rosina has not stopped speaking the language since. She signs to the air sometimes when grief overwhelms propriety. She signs to herself in the mirror, practicing conversations with a ghost, and now, it seems, she signs to a duke's forgotten son, giving voice to the voiceless once more. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let us turn to the duke. Stephen inherited Morven Heights at 22 when his own father succumbed to a riding accident. Young, handsome, wealthy, he was the season's most coveted prize, though he seemed utterly indifferent to the parade of eligible daughters thrust before him. Then he met Elizabeth Ashford at a musicale, watched her play the pianoforte with such passion that he forgot to breathe, and proposed within a month. Their marriage was, by all accounts, a love match. Rare enough among the nobility to warrant comment. They were seen walking the gardens together, laughing over private jokes, touching hands beneath dinner tables when they thought no one noticed. I noticed naturally. I notice everything. Elizabeth gave him Leo after 2 years of marriage, a difficult birth that left her weakened. The physicians advised against another child. Stephen agreed immediately. He would not risk her, he declared, not for all the spare heirs in Christendom. But Elizabeth, sweet, foolish Elizabeth, wanted to give him more. When she discovered herself with child again 3 years later, she hid it until concealment became impossible. Stephen was furious, terrified, helpless, and justified in every fear. The labour lasted 2 days. The daughter lived 3 hours. Elizabeth did not survive the dawn. That was a year ago, though Stephen moves through time as though still trapped in that blood-soaked chamber, watching helpless as everything he loved drained away. He dismissed half the staff afterward. Anyone who might look at him with pity or speak Elizabeth's name with that particular softness the grieving cannot bear. He converted her music room into storage. He burned her letters in the library fireplace, one by one, as though paper and ink could be made to stop haunting him. And Leo, who lost his mother and gained a father carved from ice, learned that love itself might be the danger, that opening one's heart leads only to destruction. Affection, Stephen told his steward last autumn, when the man suggested the boy might benefit from companionship, is a luxury I can no longer afford. The child must learn resilience, not dependence. Resilience, as though a 6-year-old who cannot speak might simply steel himself against a world determined to find him lacking. The spring gathering at Morven Heights, an annual tradition Stephen inherited and cannot quite bring himself to cancel, brought the usual collection of neighbouring gentry. Ladies in pastel silks, gentlemen in tailored coats, all gathering in the East Salon for tea and tedious conversation about crop yields and the season's prospects. Leo appeared in the doorway, hesitant, clutching the wooden horse he carries everywhere. His nursemaid had dressed him properly, grey velvet suit, hair combed smooth, but clothing cannot disguise what the child is, what he lacks. Lady Morrison saw him first. She stiffened visibly, then leaned to whisper something to her daughter, Miss Caroline Morrison, who at 17 already possesses her mother's talent for casual cruelty. Both turned away, positioning themselves to exclude the boy from their circle. Lord Hadley, never one to allow an opportunity for wit to pass unexploited, remarked loudly, "Stephen keeps peculiar shadows in this house. One wonders if he means to put the child on display or simply forgot to lock the nursery." Laughter rippled through the room. Polite, terrible laughter that freezes blood. Leo's small hands tightened on the wooden horse. He understood, even without words, what their sounds meant. He had learned to read faces, to interpret the curl of lips and the narrowing of eyes. He took one step backward, preparing to flee. And then Rosina entered from the servants' corridor, arms full of fabric samples for Lady Morrison's fitting. She saw him immediately, saw the trembling in his small shoulders, the desperate way he tried to make himself invisible. She set down her burden with deliberate care, crossed the space between them, and knelt so her eyes met his. The salon fell silent. Even Lord Hadley's smirk faltered. Rosina raised her right hand, fingers forming a simple gesture, then her left. Together, they spelled a single word in the language only she and Leo understood. Hello. Leo's grey eyes went wide, his breath caught, and then, slowly, uncertainly, his own small hands lifted and shaped the response. Hello. Two gestures, two souls recognizing each other across an impossible distance. Stephen, entering from his study to endure the gathering's final hour, stopped in the doorway. He watched this seamstress, this common village girl with mud still on her hem, speak to his son in silence, watched Leo's face transform from fear to wonder, and felt something dangerous crack in the ice around his heart. Secrets, I have learned, thrive best in forgotten spaces. And the attic sewing room at Morven Heights had been forgotten for precisely that reason. Too far from the main household to warrant supervision, too filled with dust and old furniture to attract curiosity. Perfect, in other words, for clandestine meetings between a seamstress and a silent child. It began innocently enough, if one can call anything innocent that must be hidden. The morning after the salon incident, Leo appeared at the servants' entrance just past dawn, still in his nightclothes, clutching his wooden horse. Mrs. Pemberton would have sent him straight back to the nursery, but Rosina intercepted him first. "You want to learn?" she asked, though of course he could not answer with words. He nodded so vigorously I'm told his auburn curls bounced. She glanced toward the main house, calculating risk against reward, then made her decision. "The attic. After breakfast. Can you find your way?" Another nod, this one accompanied by something remarkable. A smile. Small, uncertain, but unmistakably hopeful. Thus began their conspiracy. Every morning at 8:30, while the Duke took his breakfast in solitude and the household staff attended to their endless duties, Leo would slip up the servants' staircase to the 3rd floor. Rosina would already be there, having laid out fabric scraps and buttons to use as teaching tools. She had no formal training in instructing deaf children, only the memory of teaching Katerina, but love has always been the finest pedagogy. She started with the alphabet, 26 hand shapes, each corresponding to a letter. Leo's small fingers stumbled at first. The letter G requires a particular angle he could not quite achieve, and R involves tucking the middle finger just so. But he persisted with the single-minded determination of a child who has spent 6 years unable to express what burns inside him. By the 3rd day, he could spell his own name. By the 5th, he was forming simple words: horse, mother, sad. By the 7th, he signed to Rosina, "Why do they hate me?" She had no easy answer for that. How does one explain to a child that the world fears what it cannot understand? That nobility measures worth in bloodlines and proper behaviour, and silence registers as deficiency rather than difference? So instead she signed back, "They do not hate you. They simply have not learned to listen." Rosina admired how the boy learned so fast. It was during the 9th lesson that everything changed. Rosina had brought coloured ribbons, thinking to teach Leo the signs for different hues. She held up crimson silk and formed the sign, right index finger brushing downward across the lips. Leo mimicked her, then reached for the ribbon itself, fascinated by how light moved through the fabric. "Beautiful," Rosina signed. Leo's face scrunched in concentration as he attempted the sign, hands moving from the face outward in a circular motion opening like a flower. He got it wrong, fingers tangled, and the frustration that crossed his features was heartbreaking. Then Rosina did something spontaneous. She took the ribbon and draped it over his head like a crown, making an exaggerated expression of royal dignity. Leo's eyes went wide. And then, oh, listeners, he laughed. Not the soundless laugh from their first meeting, but something fuller, richer. His whole body shook with it, his mouth open in pure delight, his hands clutching his stomach. Silent still, yes, but unmistakably, undeniably joyful. The sound of footsteps on the attic stairs froze them both. Stephen had been searching for the estate manager when he heard movement above. The attic was meant to be unused, locked, off-limits. His first thought was mice, his second was thieves. He took the stairs 2 at a time, prepared to confront an intruder. Instead, he found his son laughing. The Duke stopped in the doorway as though struck. He had not seen Leo laugh since Elizabeth's death, had begun to wonder if the child remembered how. And here, in this dusty, forgotten room, with ribbon crown askew and joy written across every feature, was proof that his son could still feel happiness. And the woman who had given it to him was a seamstress kneeling on the floor, her own face alight with pleasure at the child's delight. Stephen felt something twist in his chest, something painful and warm and entirely unwelcome. Rosina saw him first. She rose quickly, smoothing her skirts, professional distance slamming back into place. "Your Grace, I apologize. I was merely teaching him." Stephen's voice came out rougher than intended. "Yes." She lifted her chin, prepared for dismissal or worse. "He has much to say if only someone would listen." Leo, sensing tension, moved between them. His small hands began forming signs, rapid and desperate, though Stephen could not interpret them. "He asks if he has done something wrong," Rosina translated softly. "He asks if you are angry with him." Stephen looked at his son, truly looked at him for the first time in months, saw the fear in those grey eyes so like his own, saw the way the boy's hands trembled, caught between expression and silence. "No," he managed. "I am not angry." Leo signed something else, his movements slower now, more deliberate. "He says—" Rosina hesitated, then continued. "He says he is sorry he cannot speak like other children, that he knows you wish he was different." The words hit Stephen like a physical blow. He had never said such things aloud, but children sense truth regardless. His grief, his distance, his careful avoidance, Leo had interpreted them all as rejection. "Tell him—" Stephen's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Tell him he is perfect as he is." Rosina's hands moved, Leo's eyes filled with tears, and Stephen, who had spent a year building walls around his heart, felt them begin to crumble. He turned and left the attic without another word, but the damage was done. By luncheon, every servant knew the Duke had discovered the secret lessons. By tea, speculation had transformed fact into scandal. Mary, the scullery maid, whispered to the cook that the seamstress had enchanted the cursed child. The cook told the lady's maid that the Duke had watched them with peculiar intensity. The lady's maid informed Mrs. Pemberton that impropriety was brewing under their very noses, and Mrs. Pemberton, loyal to propriety above all else, began composing the letter that would dismiss Rosina from service. But that night, alone in his study with brandy and mounting confusion, Stephen made a decision that would seal all their fates. He sent word to Mrs. Pemberton. The lessons would continue. The Duke's decree that the lessons would continue sent shockwaves through Morven Heights' carefully ordered hierarchy. Mrs. Pemberton nearly resigned on the spot. The footman exchanged knowing glances, and I, having cultivated sources in every manor house from Cornwall to Cumberland, received 3 separate accounts by week's end. Something delicious was brewing. The lessons moved from morning to evening at Stephen's insistence. The boy should not miss his other instruction, he told Mrs. Pemberton, though we all know the true reason. Evening meant candlelight. Evening meant the household winding down, servants occupied elsewhere, shadows long and privacy possible. Evening meant he could find excuses to pass by the attic sewing room, to pause outside its door, to listen to the silence within, and imagine what hands were saying. Rosina arrived each night at 7 o'clock, precisely. Leo would be waiting, already practicing signs he had learned, eager to show her his progress. She brought new lessons, numbers, colours, emotions beyond the basic happy and sad. But more than that, she brought attention. Presence, the revolutionary concept that he mattered. On the 3rd evening, while teaching the sign for father, her hand brushed Leo's cheek to demonstrate the gesture's starting position. The tenderness in that touch, unconscious, natural, made the boy lean into her palm like a flower seeking sunlight. Stephen, watching from the doorway he had not yet announced himself through, felt jealousy cut through him. Not of his son, but for him. When had anyone last touched Stephen with such gentleness? When had anyone looked at him as something other than duke, employer, the widower to be pitied or pursued? He cleared his throat. They both startled. "Your Grace," Rosina rose, that familiar wall of propriety slamming into place. "I did not hear you approach." "No." He stepped into the room, into the sphere of candlelight that made everything feel intimate and dangerous. "You were occupied." "Papa," Leo signed, then caught himself, remembered his father could not understand. His face fell. "What did he say?" Stephen asked, and there was something almost desperate in the question. "He called you Papa." Rosina's voice softened. "He asks if you would like to join the lesson." Pride warred with longing. A duke does not sit on attic floors learning hand gestures from a common seamstress. A duke maintains distance, dignity, the impenetrable armour of rank. But a father. Stephen lowered himself onto a crate, his fine evening coat entirely inappropriate for the dusty surroundings. "Show me." That night he learned 5 signs: father, son, love, home, stay. Leo taught him with a patience extraordinary for 6 years old, correcting his finger positions, demonstrating repeatedly when Stephen's large hands fumbled the delicate movements. And Rosina watched them both with something in her dark eyes that made Stephen's pulse quicken in ways he had thought dead and buried with Elizabeth. When Leo's head began to droop with exhaustion, Stephen carried him down to the nursery himself, something he had not done since the child was an infant. Leo's small arms wrapped around his neck, and Stephen felt the ice around his heart crack further. The following afternoon brought Lady Asherton and her daughters to Morven Heights for their final fittings. The Asherton girls, Lydia and Anne, both convinced of their own magnificence, required new gowns for the season, and the Dowager Duchess had promised them Morven Heights' new seamstress. They arrived in a flurry of silks and opinions, commandeering the morning room for their appointment. Rosina had prepared her sketches and fabric samples, laying them out with the professional competence she had cultivated through years of serving the particular and the privileged. "How quaint," Lydia drawled, examining a proposed design with barely concealed disdain. "One wonders if village seamstresses truly understand current fashion. This neckline is positively provincial." "The neckline," Rosina replied evenly, "is from a Paris design published in La Belle Assemblée last month." "Oh, you can read French?" Anne's tone suggested this was roughly as likely as a horse reciting Shakespeare. "How extraordinary for someone of your background." Rosina's fingers tightened on her measuring tape, but her expression remained serene. "I read enough to serve your needs, Miss Anne." Lady Asherton, scenting blood, joined the attack. "Tell me, girl, who was your mother? Anyone we might know?" The question was designed to humiliate. Ladies of quality do not associate with seamstresses' mothers. "She was a farmer's wife, my lady. She died when I was 12. "How tragic." The words dripped false sympathy. "And your father?" "A farmer, also deceased." "No family connections at all, then? No training from established modistes in London?" Lady Asherton sniffed. "One does wonder at the dowager's judgment in her final days. Grief affects the mind so terribly." Lydia giggled, Anne smirked, and Rosina, who had endured years of such casual cruelty, kept her face carefully blank. That was when Stephen entered. He had not intended to, had been passing through the corridor on his way to the library. But their voices carried, particularly Lady Asherton's, which could cut through walls when properly sharpened with malice. "Lady Asherton." His voice stopped all conversation. "How delightful to find you grace us with your presence." The women curtsied, suddenly nervous. Dukes have long memories, and Stephen's rank made him either valuable ally or devastating enemy. "Your Grace." Lady Asherton simpered. "We were simply becoming acquainted with your charming seamstress." "Indeed." Stephen's grey eyes swept the room, taking in Rosina's rigid posture, the mockery barely hidden on the sisters' faces. "Then you have discovered, I trust, that Miss Rosina possesses not only exceptional skill but also the kind of character that renders birth entirely irrelevant." The silence that followed could have shattered crystal. "Her work," Stephen continued, his voice carrying that particular aristocratic chill that could freeze fire, "has been commissioned by this household because she is the finest seamstress in 3 counties. Her dedication to her craft exceeds any supposed training from London modistes, who charge triple for half the skill. And any woman of sense would count herself fortunate to wear garments of her creation." He turned to Rosina, and something in his expression shifted, softened. "Would you not agree, Miss Rosina, that true quality needs no pedigree?" Her dark eyes met his, startled, grateful, and something else he could not quite name. "I believe, Your Grace, that quality proves itself through work, not words." "Precisely. Even a duke cannot command where his eyes insist on wandering." And Stevens, despite every effort at propriety, kept returning to the seamstress who had brought his son back to life, who stood now with spots of colour in her cheeks, chin lifted in defiance of those who would diminish her. The Asherton ladies departed shortly after, their fittings completed in strained silence. Mrs. Pemberton appeared the moment they left, lips pursed with disapproval. "Your Grace, the servants are talking." "Servants always talk." "They say you show particular favour to the seamstress." Stephen met her gaze steadily. "I show favour to competence, Mrs. Pemberton. Should I apologise for that?" "Competence is one thing, Your Grace, attachment is quite another." He dismissed her without response, but her words haunted him through dinner and into the evening, when he once again found himself drawn to the attic, to the sound of silence where his son was learning to speak without words, guided by a woman who understood impossible things. Rosina looked up when he entered, their eyes held for one heartbeat too long. "Would you guard your honour, or follow your heart, gentle listener? There are moments in life when innocence collides with cruelty, and the world shifts irrevocably. The luncheon at Morven Heights on the 15th of May was precisely such a moment. Stephen had not wanted to host it. The prospect of entertaining Lord Pembroke, Sir Richard Hastings and their vapid wives held all the appeal of voluntary torture. But social obligations, particularly among the nobility, operate with the inexorable force of gravity. One either complies or faces whispered censure across every drawing room from here to London. So the table was set. The crystal gleamed. Cook prepared her finest dishes, though Stephen suspected he would taste none of them. What he had not anticipated was Leo's appearance. The boy descended the main staircase at 1:30, dressed in his best afternoon suit, hair combed smooth by his nursemaid. He had never attended such gatherings before. Stephen had spared him that particular cruelty, knowing how the nobility regarded his silence. But something had changed in Leo these past weeks. Some new confidence, fragile as spring ice but undeniably present. He wanted to try. The footman announced luncheon. The guests assembled in the dining room, settling into their assigned seats with the practised ease of those who attend such functions weekly. Leo slipped in last, taking the chair at his father's right hand. Lady Pembroke noticed him first. Her fork paused midway to her lips. "Good heavens, Stephen. I did not realise the child would be joining us." "Leo is my son," Stephen replied, his tone brooking no argument. "This is his home." Of course, of course." Sir Richard attempted joviality and achieved only awkwardness. "Fine-looking boy. Gets bigger every time I see him." "You have never seen him," Stephen thought, but merely nodded. The meal proceeded with strained civility. Conversation centred on weather, the season's prospects, the scandalous behaviour of some baronet's daughter in Bath. Leo ate quietly, observing everyone with those solemn grey eyes, occasionally glancing at his father as if seeking permission to simply exist. Then came the moment that changed everything. Lady Hastings, attempting what she likely believed was kindness, leaned toward Leo with an exaggerated smile. "And how are you today, young man?" The table fell silent. Everyone knew the boy could not answer. The question was either cruelty disguised as courtesy or staggering ignorance. Leo looked at his father. Stephen gave the smallest nod, an encouragement he did not fully understand himself. The boy lifted his hands. Slowly, deliberately, he formed the signs Rosina had taught him. "Good afternoon. Thank you for coming." Of course, no one understood. They saw only a mute child making strange gestures, his fingers dancing through the air in patterns that held no meaning for them. Lord Pembroke laughed first. Not maliciously, perhaps, but thoughtlessly, which amounts to the same injury. "What on earth is the boy doing? Has he developed a nervous condition?" "It looks rather like he is trying to conduct an orchestra," Lady Hastings tittered. "How peculiar." "Perhaps," Lady Pembroke added with poisonous sweetness, "the child requires medical attention of a more serious nature. I have heard of asylums that specialise in such." "That is quite enough." Stephen's voice cut through the room like a blade. "My son was greeting you, in a language you are simply too limited to comprehend." The insult landed with satisfying impact. Lady Pembroke coloured. Lord Pembroke's jovial mask slipped, but the damage to Leo had already been done. The boy's hands dropped to his lap, his shoulders hunched inward, making himself small again, invisible. That hard-won confidence crumbled like sandcastles before tide. Stephen wanted to end the luncheon immediately, to throw every one of them out of his house. But propriety, that iron chain, held him in place through 3 more courses of food that tasted like ash. The moment the guests departed, Leo fled. Stephen found him 20 minutes later in the garden, hidden behind the rose arbour where Elizabeth used to read on summer afternoons. But he was not alone. Rosina knelt beside him, her afternoon work evidently forgotten, one hand on the boy's trembling shoulder. Stephen stopped behind a hedge, intending to announce himself. But Leo's hands were moving, signing something rapid and desperate, and Rosina was responding with such gentle attention that interrupting felt like desecration. "They think I am broken," Leo signed, tears streaming down his face. "No." Rosina's hands moved with fierce certainty. "They are the ones who are broken. They have forgotten how to listen with anything but their ears." Father was angry. "He was angry for you, not at you. There is a difference." Leo's small fingers formed another question. "Will I always be alone?" Rosina gathered him close, and when she signed again, her movements were visible over his shoulder. "A voice need not be loud to be heard. It simply needs someone willing to listen. And you, my brave boy, are heard. By me, by your father, by anyone with sense enough to pay attention." Stephen felt something crack open in his chest. This woman, this common seamstress with calloused hands and no surname worth recording, understood his son better than he had in 6 years. Saw him not as deficient or damaged, but as whole and worthy exactly as he was. He stepped forward. They both looked up, startled. "Miss Rosina." His voice came out rougher than intended. "A word, if you please, in private." She rose uncertain, following him to the far side of the garden where boxwoods provided screening. Leo remained by the roses, watching anxiously. For a long moment Stephen could not find words. How did one express admiration that bordered on something far more dangerous? How did one confess that a seamstress had accomplished what rank, wealth, and every advantage could not? "What you do for him," he began, then stopped, started again. "What you have given him. I cannot adequately express." "He is easy to love," Rosina said simply. "He only needed someone to try. And you." Stephen stepped closer, propriety dissolving like morning mist. "You are extraordinary." Colour flooded her cheeks. "I am a seamstress, Your Grace. You are a woman of remarkable courage and compassion. Your birth matters not at all compared to your character. It matters to society. It matters to those people who laughed at your son. Damn society. The words hung between them, radical and raw. For a moment Stephen thought he might close the distance between them, might take her hand or touch her face or commit some other irreversible act of madness. Then reality crashed back. He was a duke. She was a seamstress. His dead wife's memory still haunted every corner of his house, and the entire world would condemn them both. "But I cannot damn society," he said, stepping back. "I cannot defy it. My position, my son's future, everything depends on maintaining propriety. I understand." Her voice went carefully neutral, that wall slamming back into place. "Do you?" He searched her face. "Because I'm not certain I do. I only know that this, whatever this is, cannot continue." Pain flashed in her dark eyes before she masked it. "Of course, Your Grace. I shall finish the current commissions and then—" "No." The word came out too forcefully. "The lessons must continue, for Leo, but I cannot—" He could not finish, could not name what he was refusing himself. What neither of them realised was that they were not alone. Lady Warwick, the late Duchess Elizabeth's cousin, had arrived for an unannounced visit, had approached through the side gate, had witnessed the entire exchange from behind the garden wall. Lady Warwick, who had expected to inherit influence over Morven Heights through her connection to Elizabeth, who had been slowly, methodically displaced by this common interloper, who now possessed the most delicious weapon imaginable. She smiled in the shadows, already composing the letters that would destroy them all. "Well now, if you have reached this point, you are invested. Subscribe if you have not already, and tell me, whose side claims your loyalty? The storm approaches and you will not want to miss what comes next." Lady Warwick struck with the precision of a surgeon and the mercy of an executioner. She began, as all skilled destroyers do, with truth. A letter to Lady Pembroke describing what she had witnessed, the Duke and his seamstress alone in the garden, speaking with unmistakable intimacy. No embellishment needed. The facts themselves were sufficiently damning. By the following morning, Lady Pembroke had shared the intelligence with Lady Asherton over tea. By afternoon, Lady Asherton had informed 3 other households. By evening, the whispers had reached London, carried on the reliable wings of scandal that move faster than any royal post. I received my first report at dawn. By noon, I had confirmation from 4 separate sources. By sunset, I had the full devastating picture. The Duke of Morven Heights, that bastion of propriety and grief, had developed an attachment to a common seamstress. Worse, far worse, he had been observed confessing admiration, standing inappropriately close, allowing emotion to crack through his carefully maintained facade. London adores a tragedy stitched in silk. Lady Warwick arrived at Morven Heights on the 17th, ostensibly for a visit of familial obligation. She brought with her a trunk of mourning clothes that needed alteration, a transparent excuse to observe the household and gather additional ammunition. Mrs. Pemberton received her in the drawing-room, relief evident on her pinched features. Finally, an ally of proper standing who understood the danger brewing under their very roof. "The girl must be dismissed," Lady Warwick declared without preamble. "Immediately, before this situation deteriorates further." "I have attempted to convey such to His Grace," Mrs. Pemberton wrung her hands. "He refuses to hear reason, says the boy needs her." "The boy," Lady Warwick's lip curled. "The cursed child who cannot speak, Elizabeth's final punishment for Stephen's pride." Even Mrs. Pemberton flinched at that cruelty, but she did not contradict it. "I shall speak to Stephen myself," Lady Warwick continued. "As Elizabeth's closest living relative, I have both right and responsibility. He has forgotten himself in his grief, forgotten his duty, his station, his dead wife's memory." She found Stephen in his study, surrounded by ledgers he was not reading and brandy he was drinking too quickly. "Cousin." She did not wait for invitation before seating herself. "We must discuss the seamstress." there is nothing to discuss. On the contrary, there is scandal to contain, reputation to salvage, and propriety to restore. She leaned forward, voice dropping to intimate conspiracy. I know what you feel for her. I saw it myself. Stephen's hand tightened on his glass. You saw nothing. I saw everything. And if I saw it, others will too. The servants already whisper, the gentry already speculate. How long before it reaches the ears of those who matter? Before your son's future is destroyed by association with impropriety? Leo's future is precisely what I am trying to protect, by allowing him attachment to a woman who can never be part of his world. Lady Warwick's tone turned poisonous. She has bewitched you both. Elizabeth would be ashamed. The invocation of his dead wife's name hit its mark. Stephen flinched as though struck. Dismiss her, Lady Warwick pressed. Today, send her back to whatever village spawned her, for Leo's sake if not your own. He needs her. He needs to learn resilience, to accept his limitations. You coddle him with this signing nonsense. Give him false hope that the world will accommodate his deficiency. It will not. Better he learn that now while young than have his heart broken later. Stephen stared into his brandy, seeing only the reflection of his own cowardice. Lady Warwick was right about one thing. Scandal would destroy Leo's prospects far more effectively than silence ever could. The nobility would forgive a mute heir. They would not forgive one whose father had dallied with the help. I shall speak with her, he said finally, each word tasting like betrayal. Lady Warwick smiled. She had won, and they both knew it. Rosina was summoned to the study at 6 o'clock. She entered with her usual quiet competence, unaware that she was walking toward execution. Stephen could not meet her eyes. Miss Rosina, your services are no longer required at Morven Heights. The silence that followed could have drowned kingdoms. I do not understand. Her voice remained steady, but he heard the tremor beneath. Have I given offence? Is my work insufficient? Your work is exemplary, but circumstances have made your continued presence here inappropriate. Inappropriate. She repeated the word as though testing its weight. Because I have taught your son to communicate. Because people are talking. He finally looked at her, and the pain in her dark eyes nearly undid him. Because I cannot protect you from what they will say, what they are already saying. I have endured talk before, Your Grace. Not this kind, not scandal that could destroy any hope of future employment, future security. He stood, turned away so he would not have to watch her face. I am doing this for you. How noble. The bitterness in her voice was like acid, dismissing me for my own protection. And Leo, is this for his protection as well? Yes. Liar. The word hung between them, shocking in its directness. This is for your protection, your reputation, your comfort. You are exactly like all the others, willing to use what I offer but unwilling to stand beside me when it costs you something. That is unfair. That is truth. She drew herself up, dignity wrapping around her like armour. I shall collect my belongings and depart within the hour. Rosina. Miss Rosina, she corrected coldly. We should maintain propriety, should we not? She left without another word. Stephen poured another brandy and told himself he had done the right thing, the necessary thing, the only thing possible. He did not believe it. Leo discovered her absence at 7 o'clock, when he climbed the attic stairs for their evening lesson and found the room empty. The fabric scraps gone, the buttons cleared away, nothing remaining but dust and the ghost of companionship. He searched the house, small hands forming her name in signs no one could interpret, found only Mrs. Pemberton, who told him gently that Miss Rosina had left, that she would not be returning. The boy's face went blank. He walked to his room, climbed into bed though it was barely dark, and turned his face to the wall. By morning, he had not moved. Would not eat when food was brought. Would not respond when his nursemaid spoke. His hands lay still at his sides, as though signing itself had become pointless. By the second day, the household physician was summoned. He found nothing physically wrong, but warned gravely that children could will themselves toward death when sufficiently despairing. By the third day, Leo's fever spiked. He burned with it, delirious, his small body fighting battles no medicine could reach. Stephen sat beside his son's bed through the night, holding the boy's hot hand, whispering apologies Leo could not hear. He had thought he was protecting his son. Instead, he had destroyed him. Lady Warwick departed on the fourth day, satisfied with her work. The seamstress was gone. Order was restored. Elizabeth's memory preserved. And in the village below Morven Heights, Rosina packed her few belongings into the same battered leather case she had arrived with. Her hands moved through the motions automatically, while her heart remained in an attic room, teaching a silent boy that his voice mattered. She had saved enough coin for passage to London. Perhaps there she could start again, where no one knew her shame. But every night, alone in the darkness, her hands signed to empty air. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The storm came from the north on the fifth day, bringing with it the kind of fury that makes even the faithful question divine mercy. Rain lashed the windows of Morven Heights like accusations. Thunder shook the foundations. Lightning split the sky in jagged wounds of white fire. Leo's fever had broken that morning, but the boy remained silent in ways that transcended his usual muteness. He lay in bed staring at nothing, eating only when forced, his small hands motionless as corpses. The physician had departed with grave warnings and no solutions. Stephen sat in his study watching the storm gather, drowning in guilt that no amount of brandy could numb. He had done this, had chosen reputation over love, propriety over his son's soul, had convinced himself sacrifice was noble when it was merely cowardice dressed in evening clothes. The knock came at 3:30. Mrs. Pemberton, her face white as parchment. "Your Grace, the boy is gone." Time stopped. The world narrowed to those 4 words, each one a knife to the heart. "What do you mean gone?" "His bed is empty, his coat missing from the hook. The nursemaid thought he was sleeping, but when she checked..." Her voice broke. "He cannot have gone far in this weather. He is too weak." But Stephen knew exactly how far his son might go. Knew with terrible certainty where a desperate child would flee, to find the only person who had ever truly seen him. He was running before conscious thought caught up, shouting for his horse, for lanterns, for every able-bodied man on the estate to search. But even as servants scattered through rain-soaked grounds, Stephen knew they would not find him there. Leo had gone to the village, had gone seeking Rosina, and the moors between Morven Heights and the village were treacherous even in fair weather. In a storm like this, with darkness falling and the paths turned to rivers of mud, they were deadly. Stephen rode like a man possessed, his horse struggling against wind that tried to push them both sideways. Rain soaked through his coat within minutes, plastered his hair to his skull, blurred his vision until the world became nothing but grey fury and mounting terror. He reached the village as church bells tolled 5. The few people braving the storm pointed him toward the inn. Yes, the seamstress had taken a room there, poor thing, waiting for the mail coach to London. The inn was small, shabby, smelling of damp wool and desperation. Stephen burst through the door dripping and wild-eyed, searching faces until he found hers. Rosina sat alone by the fire, mending something in the dim light. She looked up at his entrance and her face went through a sequence of emotions too rapid to name: surprise, pain, anger, and finally alarm at his obvious distress. "Leo," he gasped, "he is missing. I think he came seeking you." She was on her feet instantly, professional competence slamming back into place. "How long?" "An hour, perhaps more." "In this storm?" Her voice went sharp with fear. "The moors, I know." He grabbed her arm, propriety incinerated by panic. "Please, help me find him. You know him better than anyone. Where would he go?" She could have refused, should have, after everything he had done. Instead, She seized her cloak and was out the door before he could draw breath. They searched together through rain that felt like punishment. Stephen called Leo's name until his voice went raw, though he knew the boy could not hear him. Rosina moved with purpose, checking places a desperate child might shelter. The old shepherd's hut, the stone wall with the gap wide enough for small bodies, the hollow oak at the crossroads. Nothing. No sign. Just rain and darkness and mounting dread. "The fallen tree!" Rosina shouted over the storm. "Near the boundary stone. Katerina used to hide there during storms. If Leo asked me about places I loved." They ran. The tree had come down years ago, creating a natural shelter where its massive trunk met the earth. Rosina reached it first, dropping to her knees in the mud, peering into the shadowed space beneath. And there he was. Leo, soaked and shivering, his small body curled against the tree's bulk, his lips blue with cold. But alive, conscious, his grey eyes opening at the sound of their approach. Rosina reached for him, but he scrambled backward, hands forming rapid, desperate signs. "He says he will not go back," she translated, her voice breaking. "He says he would rather die than return to a house without me." Stephen felt something shatter in his chest. All his careful walls, his protective armour, his prideful distance. It all crumbled into nothing before his son's devastating honesty. He dropped to his knees in the mud beside Rosina, heedless of rank or dignity or anything except the terrified child before him. "Leo," he said, knowing the boy could not hear but hoping he might understand. "Please," Rosina touched his arm. "Sign it. I will teach you." Her hands guided his through the gestures, her fingers warm against his frozen skin, moulding his movements into meaning. "Please," he signed, the word clumsy but comprehensible. "Come home." Leo stared at his father, shocked into stillness. Stephen's hands moved again, following Rosina's patient instruction. "I was wrong, so wrong. I chose pride over love, chose fear over you. Forgive me." Tears mingled with rain on Leo's face. His small hands lifted, trembling with cold and emotion both. And then he signed something Stephen did not understand, but whose meaning hit him like physical force. "What did he say?" Stephen's voice cracked. Rosina's own tears were falling now. He said, "Father, I love you." 6 years. 6 years of silence between them, of distance carefully maintained, of love unspoken because Stephen had believed speaking it would make losing it more unbearable. And now his son, his beautiful, brave, extraordinary son, was offering forgiveness he did not deserve. Stephen pulled Leo into his arms, holding him tight against his chest, feeling the small body shudder with cold and relief. Over the boy's head, his eyes met Rosina's. "Both of you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Come home, both of you. Please." She searched his face in the storm's fury, looking for certainty, for courage, for proof that this time he would not falter. What she found there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once and helped him lift Leo onto his horse. They rode back together through the tempest, 3 souls bound by understanding deeper than words, heading toward a house that might finally become a home. There are moments when the entire weight of society balances on a knife's edge, when a single choice can either reinforce the old order or shatter it entirely. The summer ball at Morven Heights on the 3rd of June became precisely such a moment. Stephen had announced the ball with only a week's notice, unprecedented brevity that set tongues wagging before a single guest arrived. Invitations went to every family within 50 miles, to London society figures, to those who had witnessed Leo's humiliation at the luncheon, and those who had spread whispers about the dismissed seamstress. Most expected a return to normalcy. A widowed duke resuming social obligations, proving that whatever madness had gripped him had passed. Lady Warwick certainly believed so, arriving in black silk and satisfied smugness, ready to witness propriety's restoration. I had my sources positioned throughout the ballroom, a lady's maid here, a footman there, all carefully cultivated to ensure I would miss nothing of what promised to be the season's most significant event. The ballroom blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames reflected in crystal chandeliers and polished mirrors. The orchestra tuned their instruments. Guests assembled in their finest silks and jewels, arranged by rank and consequence, already forming the judgment that would either elevate or destroy. 8 o'clock arrived. The butler announced arrivals with practised formality: Lord and Lady Pembroke, Sir Richard and Lady Hastings, the Asherton family, Lydia and Anne whispering behind fans, Lady Warwick positioning herself prominently, the better to observe and condemn. Then came 9 o'clock. The ballroom doors opened. Stephen appeared at the top of the stairs, but he did not descend alone. On his right hand stood Leo, dressed in midnight blue velvet that matched his father's coat, his auburn curls carefully arranged, his grey eyes solemn and clear. And on Stephen's left hand, in a gown that made every woman present reassess their own dressmaker, stood Rosina. The dress she wore was her own creation naturally, deep emerald silk that brought out the richness of her dark hair and eyes, cut in the latest fashion, but with subtle details that marked her as artist rather than merely wearer. Simple pearls at her throat, borrowed from the late Duchess's collection, as I later discovered. Her head held high despite the storm of whispers that erupted the moment she appeared. The scandal was immediate and spectacular. "The seamstress," Lady Pembroke hissed to her neighbour. "He has brought the dismissed seamstress as though she were a lady." "And positioned her as equal to himself," Lady Hastings breathed. "The audacity." "The impropriety," Lady Warwick's voice carried further than she perhaps intended. "Has the man lost all sense of decency?" The whispers multiplied, spreading through the ballroom like fire through dry grass. Shock, outrage, delicious horror at witnessing a duke commit social suicide before their very eyes. Stephen descended the stairs with Rosina and Leo flanking him, moving with the calm deliberation of a man who had already counted the cost and found it acceptable. The crowd parted before them, leaving a channel of scandalized silence that led to the ballroom's centre. The orchestra faltered. The conductor looked to Stephen for guidance. "Continue playing," Stephen commanded. Then to the assembled guests, his voice carrying to every corner. "Thank you all for attending tonight. I have gathered you here as witnesses." One does not typically require witnesses to a ball. The phrase itself suggested something more significant, more dangerous. "Many of you," he continued, his grey eyes sweeping the room, "have wondered at recent events in this household. Some have speculated, others have judged, and a few have spread falsehoods designed to destroy that which they do not understand." Lady Warwick's face went pale. "The woman standing beside me is Miss Rosina. Some of you know her as a seamstress. I know her as the person who saved my son's life." He gestured to Leo, who stood straight despite visible nervousness, his small hand gripping his father's coat. "My son cannot speak as you speak, but he is not mute, he is not cursed, he is not deficient or damaged or any other diminishing term you have applied to him. He simply speaks in a language you have been too ignorant or too callous to learn." The insult landed like a slap. Several ladies gasped. Lord Pembroke's face coloured dangerously. "Miss Rosina taught my son this language, gave him the ability to express thoughts and feelings he has harboured since birth. She did what physicians, tutors, and his own father had failed to do. She saw him as complete rather than broken." Stephen's hand found Rosina's, holding it openly before 300 witnesses. "I dismissed her from this household because I was a coward, because I feared your judgment more than I valued her worth, because I chose the comfort of your approval over my son's happiness and my own heart." The silence in the ballroom had transformed from shocked to riveted. No one moved, no one dared even breathe loudly. "But I will not make that mistake again." His voice rang with conviction. "Miss Rosina possesses more grace, compassion, and true nobility in her seamstress's hands than most of us manage in our entire titled existence. If compassion is common, may all men of rank be peasants beside her." Someone in the back began to whisper. Stephen's gaze found them, and the words died. You may judge us. You may withdraw your approval, your invitations, your society. But know this. I would rather stand alone with these two beside me than crowned with the approval of people who measure worth by birth, rather than character. He turned to Leo, whose small face showed something I can only describe as fierce love. Would you like to tell them? Stephen signed the question, his movement still clumsy but comprehensible. Leo nodded. He stepped forward, and this child of 6 who had been mocked and pitied and dismissed as defective lifted his hands and signed with perfect clarity. She is my voice. Of course, most still did not understand the signs themselves, but they understood the meaning, understood the love and gratitude written across the boy's face, understood that something sacred and profound had just been offered to them. Rosina's hands moved in response, signing back, "And you are my heart." And then, I confess this surprised even me, Leo signed something else, something that required Rosina to translate aloud for the assembly. He says, her voice carried clear and strong, that a voice need not be loud to matter, that silence can hold more truth than 1,000 words, and that he hopes someday all of you will learn to listen. For a long moment nothing happened. The ballroom held its collective breath, balanced between condemnation and something else entirely. Then, from an unexpected corner, someone began to clap. It was Miss Caroline Morrison, of all people, the same young woman who had turned away from Leo at the luncheon. Her applause rang out alone at first, defiant and clear. Her mother clutched her arm, hissing for her to stop, but Caroline continued clapping, and slowly others joined. A gentleman here, a lady there. Then more and more, until the entire ballroom erupted in applause that shook the chandeliers. Not everyone participated. Lady Warwick stood frozen in fury. Lord and Lady Pembroke remained conspicuously still. But they were outnumbered by those who chose, in that moment, compassion over convention. Stephen pulled Rosina close, propriety abandoned, and kissed her before God and society, and anyone who cared to witness it. The applause grew louder. The wedding took place on a Tuesday, chosen not for auspicious alignment of stars, but simply because neither Stephen nor Rosina wished to wait a moment longer than necessary for the banns to be read. I confess I did not expect an invitation to the ceremony itself. Lady Whistledown is rarely welcomed at the events she chronicles, but my sources proved more than adequate. The village church overflowed with witnesses, an unprecedented mixing of station that would have scandalised the ton mere months earlier. Dukes and stable boys, ladies and laundresses, all crammed into oak pews to watch a seamstress become a duchess. Leo served as ring-bearer, walking the aisle with such solemn pride that several guests wept openly. He had practised for weeks, ensuring he could carry the velvet cushion without dropping the precious cargo. When he reached the altar and presented the rings, he signed to his father with perfect clarity, "She will make us whole." Stephen's hands, now far more practised in this silent language, signed back, "She already has." The ceremony itself was brief, but profound. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the kiss that followed lasted just long enough to be thoroughly improper and absolutely perfect. The church erupted in applause that echoed the ballroom triumph, but this time without scandal. Only joy. The wedding breakfast at Morven Heights fed 300 souls. Tables stretched across the south lawn, laden with delicacies that made no distinction between noble and common guests. I am told Lord Pembroke found himself seated beside a cobbler and, after initial stiffness, discovered they shared an enthusiasm for fishing. Miracles, it seems, come in unexpected forms. But the true transformation of Morven Heights began in the weeks that followed. Rosina, Duchess Rosina now, though she never quite lost the habit of introducing herself without title, did not simply occupy the late Elizabeth's rooms and call herself satisfied. She had seen too much, understood too much, to waste her elevation on mere comfort. The attic sewing room where she had first taught Leo became something far more significant. By autumn, It had been expanded, properly furnished, filled with light from new windows cut into the roof. And twice weekly, children arrived for lessons, not just noble children, though several families sent their sons and daughters once they understood what was being offered, but common children too. The deaf daughter of the village blacksmith, the mute son of a tenant farmer, a girl from 3 counties over whose parents had heard whispers of a duchess who spoke with her hands. Rosina taught them all, freely and without judgment, taught them the language that had saved her sister's memory and transformed a duke's forgotten son into someone seen, heard, valued. Other instructors came too, as word spread, a former sailor who had lost his hearing to cannon fire and learned to sign aboard ship, a governess from London whose own child could not speak. Morven Heights became something unprecedented, a place where silence was not shameful, but simply another way of being human. Leo flourished in ways that stole breath. By his 7th birthday, he was teaching signs to younger children, his patience infinite and his joy obvious. By 8, he was reading voraciously, signing his thoughts about books to anyone who would watch. By 9, several neighbourhood families had learned basic signs simply to communicate with him, and he had stopped being the cursed child and become simply Leo, clever, kind, occasionally mischievous Leo. Stephen transformed too, though more quietly. The ice that had encased his heart since Elizabeth's death melted slowly but completely. He laughed again, sang off-key while dressing, much to his valet's horror. Took Leo riding across the moors and signed stories of his own childhood, things he had thought buried with grief. But mostly, he loved his wife with the desperate gratitude of a man who had nearly lost everything through cowardice and been granted improbable redemption. I witnessed their private moments through the careful reportage of household staff who served them with genuine affection rather than mere duty. Mrs. Pemberton herself, initially so opposed to the match, became one of Rosina's fiercest defenders after watching the Duchess nurse a scullery maid through fever while the Duke himself carried water and blankets. "She is more noble than half the titled ladies I have served," Mrs. Pemberton confessed to me over tea, a rare moment of candour. "And he is more human than he has been in years." On their first anniversary, Stephen found Rosina in the garden at dawn, watching the roses Elizabeth had planted years before. She did not hear him approach, lost in thought, and he took the opportunity to observe her unguarded. This woman who had stormed into his frozen life and refused to accept his careful death. He came up behind her, took her hand, and signed across her palm where she could feel the movements. "You saved us." She turned, tears already beginning, though her smile blazed bright. Her own hands moved in response. We saved each other. And it was true. She had given them voice, yes, but Stephen had given her something equally precious, the understanding that worth is not determined by birth, that love can crack even the coldest armour, that choosing vulnerability over pride is not weakness but the deepest courage. The scandal that had threatened to destroy them became instead the foundation of their legend. By the 2nd year of their marriage, other estates began establishing similar programmes for children who communicated differently. By the 5th year, Parliament was debating formal education for deaf pupils, with the Duke of Morven Heights speaking passionately in support. Lady Warwick, for the curious among you, departed for the continent shortly after the wedding and has not returned. Some failures are too public to endure gracefully. As for Leo, well, the boy who was once dismissed as cursed grew into a young man of remarkable character. He eventually founded a school that still operates today, providing instruction in sign language and proving daily that silence need not mean isolation. But I am getting ahead of myself, allowing sentiment to override chronology. Forgive an old scandalmonger her indulgence. When one has chronicled as much misery as I have, witnessing genuine happiness proves almost intoxicating. Thus ends the tale of a duke redeemed by a seamstress's hands, proof that even silence, when stitched with love, may outshine the loudest symphony. The manor at Morven Heights still stands, no longer frozen in grief, but alive with laughter and the swift movements of hands shaping meaning from air. Children who once would have been hidden away or institutionalized now run through its halls, learning that different need not mean lesser. And on quiet evenings, when the lessons are complete and the students departed, the Duke and Duchess of Malvern Heights sit together by candlelight. Sometimes they speak with voices, more often they speak with hands. Always they speak with the profound understanding of two souls who found each other across an impossible distance and refused to let convention dictate the boundaries of love. London whispered scandal, yes, but the whispers changed to wonder, and wonder to something approaching wisdom. Do you, dear listener, believe love can sow pride into grace? Whisper below and await my next revelation. And so we conclude. If this tale moved you, subscribe, share it, and tell me below which moment seized your heart most. I have many more stories to whisper. Will you join me?